Caitlin, you're getting some new information now about the president's nominee to be the next attorney general.
And the president's reaction as he was watching that nominee testify on Capitol Hill on Tuesday during his confirmation hearing. We are now learning from sources that the president was startled as he watched Bill Barr testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee and describing the warm relationship that he has with the special counsel Robert Mueller. Now, on Tuesday, when Barr was testifying, he was talking about how when he first met the president in the summer of 2017, and he said the president was interested in the relationship that he had with Mueller. Listen to what he said.
The president wanted to know, he said, "Oh, you know Bob Mueller. How well do you know Bob Mueller?" And I told him how well I knew Bob Mueller and how, the Barrs and Muellers were good friends and would be good friends when this is all over.
So, Wolf, he says there that the president was interested in that relationship, but later he goes on to describe what a relationship they've had and how it's spanned for decades. And we're told that those details actually caught the president off guard and that he bristled as he watched Bill Barr speak so favorably of Robert Mueller, even referring to him on a first-name basis multiple times. The president did not like that. He was complaining to aides, saying he didn't know how close they were and that he didn't know how much their work at the Department of Justice had overlapped previously. Now, we're being told this by three sources. It doesn't mean that the president is thinking of withdrawing Bill Barr's nomination, but it does give you some insight into how he feels about this. And we're told the president later rationalized this and calmed down from being so upset about the new details that emerged during that hearing, that he rationalized this by saying, well, Bill Barr and Robert Mueller are part of the Washington establishment, and that's why they have this relationship going on. But, Wolf, it's interesting in the backdrop of not only the president's complaints about the Russia investigation, but also his complaints about the former FBI director, James Comey, who he fired and multiple times has said was best friends with Robert Mueller, even though James Comey testified he doesn't even have Robert Mueller's cell phone. But now the president's pick for attorney general is someone who's actually friends with Robert Mueller.
I assume the president was deeply irritated when he heard Bill Barr say he doesn't believe Mueller would ever be involved in a witch hunt. The president calls that whole investigation a witch hunt, as our viewers know. Jim Sciutto, let's talk about Rudy Giuliani. That was quite a bombshell we heard last night.
It's a very simple statement to make that the Trump campaign did not collude with Russia, but the attorney for the president, who's made that statement multiple times, no longer says that. He no longer denies that members of the Trump campaign did so. So the question is, did he learn something about what Robert Mueller has discovered that has changed his approach to this? Folks will often say, well, that's just Rudy Giuliani going off again. But as we know, with, for instance, the Stormy Daniels payments, which the president, of course, initially denied, it was Rudy Giuliani, who everybody thought was going out on a limb mistakenly, confirming that the president knew about them, when in fact that turned out to be true. Was Rudy Giuliani laying the groundwork for a revelation, perhaps from the Mueller investigation? That's possible. I mean, the next question then is this, for the president's involvement. You would have to believe that the president's son set up a meeting in Trump Tower in June 2016 without the president's knowledge. You would have to believe that the president's national security advisor spoke with the Russian ambassador during the transition about relaxing sanctions without the president's knowledge. You'd have to also believe that Paul Manafort, his campaign chairman, shared polling data with the Russians without the president's knowledge. It creates a web here where Giuliani's trying to create a separation, which you would imagine would be difficult to hold through that time, especially given how small that campaign was.
You're absolutely right. How do you read Giuliani's comments?
Yeah, so I think first of all, it's worth noting that they're plainly wrong, right? He asserted that the only possible crime here was collusion involving the hack of the DNC. That's just wrong. Robert Mueller has actually indicted people for crimes that are not related to that, including conspiracy to defraud the United States. And I think it's always significant whenever you see the president and his advisors and legal team moving the goalpost, right? Originally, their story was there was no contact with any foreign entities whatsoever. Then it was there was no contact with Russians. Then there was, well, yes, there was a meeting with Russians, but it was about adoptions. Then all of a sudden it was, well, there was a meeting with Russians, but it was about obtaining dirt on Hillary Clinton. So I do think that what we're seeing here is that as the facts are against them, Rudy Giuliani is now shifting to try and argue narrower legal theories. I think it's notable that he's attempting to sort of carve out, make a distinction between the president personally versus the rest of the campaign. Giuliani has not been terribly careful in the way he speaks in the past, so I don't know how much we can credit those statements. That said, I also think it's interesting that Giuliani is really narrowly focusing on a criminal statutory legal theory here. He's someone who said over and over again that a sitting president can't be indicted, and so I do think that it's a little bit of a hint that Giuliani understands that ultimately they're going to be making their case to Congress and attempting to argue to Congress potentially that the president hasn't technically violated the law, as Congress maybe considers impeachment.
And if that were not enough, David Sword, we also learned today that the president's longtime lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, that he was paying some IT firm thousands and thousands of dollars to try to rig some of these online polls to make it look like support for Donald Trump was much bigger than it actually was during the campaign.
Look, Cohen has tried to repair his image, but he's a bottomless mug of this kind of, dirty tricks that he did on behalf of President Trump, or at least has alleged to have done on behalf of President Trump and the Trump campaign. He was a flunky, and that is going to continue to be around his neck until we learn the whole truth about everything that's happened.
Yeah, you wanted to weigh in on that?
Well, listen, look at what he admitted to, and he implicated the president in if not a crime, in a massive dirty trick, faking the polls. Of course, this was a president who claimed the polls were all rigged. When you have his fixer and lawyer here saying that they paid money to rig the polls in a way that is right out of a mob story. A paper bag full of money and boxing glove as payoff?
It's also part of the theme of the president's campaign being about tricking the American people into electing him president.
But it also shows how much of this, a lot of this, Michael Cohen, since he has pleaded guilty, has tied so many of his actions back to the president. But in this story, one of the more bizarre details was that he paid someone to create a Twitter account, Women for Michael Cohen, that said flattering things about his looks. They praised when he praised the president. It essentially amplified anything good he said or anything good about him. And today when he responded to that story, he said, I essentially regret my blind loyalty to the president, but anything I did with regards to the polling story was at the sole benefit and direction of Donald J. Trump. And I don't think it benefits the president to have Michael Cohen's looks being praised on Twitter. It goes to show how caught up Michael Cohen was in this world, not only in assisting the president and trying to help inflate these polls so the president, he could take those back to the president, someone who pays very close attention to polls. He was also in this for himself.
And if he was willing to do this, a dirty trick like this, to rig some online poll in order to show tremendous support for Donald Trump and pay some IT expert to do that. By the way, it's one of the reasons CNN does not appreciate these online polls. We're worried about them all the time. But if he's willing to do this, what else might he be willing to do?
Pay off a porn star, right? With a lot of money and break campaign finance law and plead guilty to that crime and implicate the president. I mean, we know that. And again, this would be another thing where do we believe that the president, then candidate, did not know that his longtime lawyer and fixer was paying $50,000 to an outside provider to rig a poll to the president's benefit? It's one more in a long list of things where you got to believe a lot. You got to be pretty credulous to imagine that this whole series of acts happened without the president's knowledge.
Yeah, and look, I think it's worth noting that Michael Cohen was sort of President Trump's least competent sort of fixer here. And so you do have to ask, whenever you look at people who are incredibly well-versed and competent, people like Paul Manafort, what might they have been up to on his behalf?
Seth Meyers, the late-night comedy host, he had some fun with the president last night. Listen to this, and it's very, very cute. Listen to this.
The FBI was investigating whether Trump was working for the Russians. I mean, what tipped them off? Was it Trump's secret meeting with the Russians at the Oval Office, his son's secret meeting with Russians at Trump Tower, his lawyer's secret deal to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, Jeff Sessions' secret meeting with the Russian ambassador, Jared Kushner's secret back channel with the Kremlin, Michael Flynn's secret back channel with the Kremlin, Eric Prince's secret back channel with the Kremlin, Paul Manafort sharing secret polling data with the Russians, his foreign policy advisor's secret meeting with the Russians, the Russian hackers who helped Trump win, Trump asking the Russian hackers to help him win, or Vladimir Putin smile every time he sees Trump.
Pretty funny.
Yeah, it is clever. Look, Susan mentioned conspiracy to defraud the United States before. That hasn't been proven. What that clip does prove is that people were playing footsie with the Russians.
What do you think?
Listen, I mean, we learned in the whole host of things we learned today, we learned that the president repeatedly parroted a talking point given to him by the Russian president on hacking of the election, saying that our hackers are so good that they would never be caught by a U.S. intelligence community, which you know the story. He called David Sanger of the New York Times. He repeated it in a Reuters interview. A poll report, Anthony Scaramucci repeated it to our colleague Jake Tapper. That became a statement from the White House regarding Russian interference.
He bought that, Caitlin. He bought that argument from Putin.
And he said he thought it was a good argument. And that's why you've seen the president so many times when asked about believing them, or not just believing them, but confronting them, which is what most of the intelligence agencies have said, not only that he did, but they believed would be the appropriate response. And that's why you've seen time and time again, he said, well, I confronted him about it, but he denied it. And there's only so many times I can ask him. That's why you saw what we saw in Helsinki when you witnessed the president standing next to him on stage, essentially not confronting him at all for it, saying he didn't see why it would be Russia, and then the next day trying to clean it up, even though there's not really much cleaning that up.
Clearly, the president right now is not good reporting on Bill Barr, the attorney general nominee, but he was clearly not happy. We saw him earlier today at the Pentagon. He was pretty angry about what's going on.